Tom McCormick.
Thank you, David. You really gonna have to bear with me because I had to talk really fast? I got a lot of information? No. I'm not gonna go that fast, but this is very dense material. Hopefully you're all going to be paying rapt, prompt attention. We're going to be going to places that probably you've never been before. First of all, this is the title of my new book. And I spent about 13 years in the San Luis Valley in south central Colorado, north central New Mexico. This theory that I've come up with is a direct result of a lot of work out in the field. I investigated hundreds and hundreds of UFO sightings, around 200 cattle mutilation cases. I went into haunted houses. I worked with abductees. I helped the sheriff investigate ritual occult crime. All these types of so-called paranormal events led me to my theory, which I will be presenting today in an abbreviated form. So just to give you an idea of who I am, in case some of you don't know my background, I did write 3 books about my San Luis Valley investigations. Secrets of the Mysterious Valley we have in the bookstore. What is a trickster? Okay, I'm a trickster today. So we're all tricksters. We all have a trickster in us. The original trickster, of course, was what? Mark was just talking about the original trickster, which is our, I'm going to unplug this so we don't have a ring. The original trickster was the serpent in the Garden of Eden. Now, that's all well and good. That's a trickster in one particular tradition, but tricksters are found all over the world. I am using the Carl Jung's definition of the trickster as an archetype. An archetype is a collectively inherited, unconscious idea, pattern of thought, ideas, images, and all these types of images and ideas are found in each one of us in the subconscious or collective unconscious level. So we all share this around the world. In other words, if you live here in Sedona, you have the same archetypal symbols that someone living in the Kalahari Desert has, or someone living in China. We all share these collective archetypal symbols. Now, let's go through a few of these quickly. The anima and the animus, the male and female form, they're faceless. They don't have a features on them. It's more of a concept. The Venus figures, which is the mother. How many know what a Venus figure is? We've seen them in the pictures of the very rotund sort of, I'm not sure how to say this properly, but the Venus figures, all these figures are faceless. The child, again, is faceless. It's more of a concept. It's more of an image that doesn't really contain a personality. It's just a form. The mandala is also a symbol of transformation, which we all share around the world. These are all faceless archetypes. Now, the collective unconscious, as I mentioned, is a part of the individual's unconscious mind that we share within the society and all of humanity and all life forms. And it's a product of our ancestral experience, and it contains all the concepts that we all share: science, religion, myths, morality, and how do we define the trickster, which is one of these archetypes that I had up there. George Hansen wrote a very good book called The Trickster and the Paranormal. I recommend it highly. A trickster is a collection of abstract properties that can manifest on several levels, within individuals, within situations, small groups, entire cultures, and across the world. So the properties are not necessarily related by cause and effect. They are a constellation. It's all the various elements over millennia coming together and us collectively experiencing these things. Okay, the trickster manifests within this collective concept, okay? Just like the animus does, just like the gods and goddesses, the hero, these are all archetypes. The trickster is the most primal and most original of these archetypes that has a face. This is important. Okay. The classic anthropological view, up until I came along and started kicking the definition in the shins, is that the trickster is static, that it does not evolve, that it's unconscious and it's not self-aware. The trickster is a liminal force. It's neither good nor bad. It's neither old or young, male or female, and it's not black or white, and it dances really good. So Michael Jackson would be a classic trickster. Okay. The trickster has a role, and that role is very simple. It breaks down static structures within a society or a culture. In other words, if the powers that be or the controlling structure gets too entrenched and too powerful, the trickster invariably supplies novelty and change and anti-structure to topple static systems. This is also important. Remember that. So the trickster is an agent of change within the culture. Now, the trickster in its most primal form, back prior to monotheism and prior to the patriarchy, 7,000 years ago when urban culture was first established, 8,000 years ago, the trickster was able to change Gaia in the myths and legends of indigenous people. And prior to all this monotheistic, instead of gods and goddesses, we have a monotheistic God, at least in the West. Prior to this, the trickster was mostly found as an animal form. And we'll get into the various types of classifications. The most ancient, again, is an anthropomorphized animal. In other words, it's like coyote or raven or iktomi, the spider. There's various animal forms that you can go all around the world and find that are attributed to trickster forms. Tricksters are found in every culture on every continent. Okay, we just don't recognize them now. The Catholic Church, for instance, marginalized the trickster, and the trickster, instead of being an amoral, neither good nor bad, or positive or negative thing, became the devil. Because the church feared the trickster, so they marginalized the trickster and said it's evil. So that's why when Mark, it was a point well taken, when Mark mentioned that the serpent form, as it existed in the Garden of Eden, was not necessarily a negative thing. It's just been sort of painted into that negative place. So, after the anthropomorphized animal, then the next type of trickster form we have is the tragic hero. And then our first historic example of tricksters are the shaman of a particular indigenous culture. The shaman, of course, for the most part now have been replaced by a priest class, which is different from a shaman, and we'll get into that a little bit later. Okay. The most modern and probably prevalent trickster form that you're going to recognize in your everyday life today is the human parasitic trickster. This would be like Bernie Madoff tricking, several hundred people out of $60 billion. That would be a very classic form of human tricksterism, obviously. Harry Houdini, the Fox sisters who started the spiritualist movement. Basically, what I'm suggesting is the ancient, most pure trickster forms are symbiotic. They work in concert with humanity. They help humanity. They assist humanity. Human tricksters are parasitic. They take from humanity. Big distinction. I'll also have to get back to that a little later. Okay. Anybody recognize this guy, the court jester, or the holy fool, if you will? This is a classic trickster form from the Middle Ages. Again, Heyoka. This is a classic trickster form from the Native American tradition, the clown societies. Heyoka happens to be the Lakota version. And Bernie Madoff. Okay. Now, let's put it into a historical context. I will recap quickly. With the rise of urban culture, we had a shift from the matriarchy to a patriarchy. We had the rise of monotheism and the priest class, which replaced a pantheistic society and the shaman. We have religious miracles and relics, as Mark pointed out. My favorite is the foreskin of Christ. There's two of them. He must have been a very interesting guy. Okay, mass delusion in the madness of crowds. I was hoping for punchline laughter there, but never mind. Okay. Here's some modern examples. Joseph Smith, starting the Mormon religion, was visited by a glowing angel who said, here's 2 plates of gold. We get these, translated and go out west and start your own religion. What happened to the plates of gold? The trickster took them back. Okay. The Fox sisters, just down the road in upstate New York, they started the spiritualist movement in the 1870s, which totally helped topple the Victorian age and take the staid sort of very conservative morals and social mores of the Victorian age and then open it up a little bit. Aleister Crowley, one of my favorite tricksters. We'll get to him a little bit later. H.G. Wells, War of the Worlds, The Roswell crash, I think, is another classic trickster event, which we can talk about at length, but not today. My favorite, well, if I had to vote for the most tricksterish of all modern events, it would be 9/11. Didn't happen the way that they tell you it did, if you do your research. And of course, our good old friend Bernie. Okay, now, tricksters are not static. I'm going to review here again. Everything evolves, okay? This is my theory. This is how I'm differing from the classic anthropological view. The classic view is that tricksters are static and unconscious. The first thing I am doing in my theory is I'm refuting that. Nothing is static. We live in an evolving universe, okay? And if the trickster is not static and is evolving, then it's got to be evolving into awareness and consciousness. This is the first departure point that I'm taking from the classic anthropological view of the trickster. This is important. I like to equate the trickster as an 8,000-pound gorilla who sits in every single one of your living room and he's drumming his toes on the table. We'll get back to that. Okay, so nothing is static. Here's some of our animal tricksters, good old coyote. Coyote is often described as in a human form, but he's kind of a liminality or a liminal nature is standing at the threshold. You haven't walked through the door, and you haven't quite left the room that you were in. So liminality is that threshold between night and day, positive, negative, black and white. And coyote is a very important liminal figure in the Native American tradition in that he is often described as being human, as adopting human form. And this brings us to raven. Raven is a very important trickster in several Native American traditions. Tricksters in the anthropomorphized animal sense, as I said, help change Gaia. Well, most of these animal forms that you find around the world that are described as tricksters have a story attached to them about helping humanity by changing nature in some way. Raven in the Northwest American Indian tradition brought daylight to the Indians and allowed them to have a day so that they could plant and grow. Prometheus, of course, would be an example of a human trickster with a face that also brings fire to humanity. Spider and Iktomi, this is actually a Hopi maize symbol. I couldn't find a picture of Iktomi. But spider forms have a tendency in indigenous traditions to help us remember our stories in the oral tradition, which helps humanity. Renard the fox is a fairly famous French trickster form from the early Dark Ages into the early Middle Ages, and delighted in toppling the aristocracy and poking fun at the Pope, which is something I can appreciate. Okay, this is the only trickster form that you'll find in all regional groups of Native Americans is the thunderbird. Even though it's not considered classically a trickster form, there is traditions in the Midwest where the thunderbird is equated as a trickster and often is associated with lightning and storms. Okay. Here's probably a hoaxed picture of a thunderbird. David has a very good chapter in his, he's mentioned it in several books about the thunderbird sightings in North America. There's some examples. We just had a rash of sightings in South Texas, I think last year and the year before. This brings us to our next trickster type, and that is the tragic hero. Prometheus, as I mentioned before, stole fire from Zeus. Zeus punished him by sending Zeus's eagle to peck out his liver every day, heals at night, and then the eagle comes and does it again. This supposedly, he was chained in the, I think the Caucasus Mountains. I don't know what this other form is down below. With the snake of the guy coming out, but it looked cool. So, this is one of Randy's favorite trickster forms. This is Loki. Loki is a Scandinavian trickster who introduced the fishing hooks to humanity. So these are examples of human-type tricksters in that they have a face and they have a personality who supply humanity with technology, and this is important. So you have anthropomorphized animals that can change nature for the benefit of humanity in a symbiotic way. And now we're looking at tricksters with a human face that bring technology to humanity. I will be getting back to this, so kind of take notes here. Okay, the shamanic trickster. This is This is our bridge between the ancient anthropomorphized animal and tragic hero tricksters to the modern era. And shamanic tricksters, as we know about the shamanic tradition, the shaman is a helper, a conduit for individuals and cultures to attain divinity or attain conversation with their higher self or with some form of Gaia energy, depending on the tradition. And shaman, unlike priests, are conduits. They're not gatekeepers to divinity, as priests and ministers could be equated in the modern era. Here's some forms of tricksters from around the world. This is from the Mesoamerican culture. This is Bampana from Australia, very similar to a skinwalker, which we'll talk about in a minute. And I'm not sure what this guy is. Clifford, do you know who this guy is? Pretty interesting looking. He looks kind of tricksterish to me, so I used him. Okay, this is my artistic representation of the ancient form of tricksterism, which are these three figures that are found in an initiation cave in Australia. And what I did was I merged it or morphed it with a circuit board. So this would be an example of a modern form of shamanic trickster form in an artistic sense. Okay. What are the commonalities between tricksters? When I first started my research, the first thing I did was refute the anthropological view. I said, wait a minute, nothing is static. Tricksters are evolving. And if they're evolving, they're not unconscious. They're actually becoming conscious and becoming aware. So the next thing I did was I looked at all the trickster forms from around the world, and I had spent months researching them. There's thousands of trickster forms. I had no idea how many there were. It's amazing. And of course, I can only cover a few today. But I wanted to see what connected them all. What is that major correlation that ties them all together? And what did I find? They're shapeshifters. Now, take a leap with me here. If this particular correlation is correct, and if we look at tricksters as shapeshifters or having the ability to shapeshift, this totally blows the door wide open. So tricksters are now, anthropologically, they're ancient, they're not around, they've been invisible for years, they've been marginalized by the patriarchy and by monotheism. But if we allow for shapeshifting, we allow for consciousness, and we allow for evolution in the trickster, then a lot of different types of paranormal phenomena fall right into a trickster category. The first one, the most famous shapeshifter, is the werewolf. Werewolves are found in every culture on the planet. I had no idea. I thought it was Lon Chaney and the werewolves of London and, some Hollywood thing. But no, there's werewolves all over the place. You do your research. What makes a werewolf form interesting, along with vampire forms, is this is a tricksterish event with a victim that is involuntarily turned into a shapeshifter. This is kind of important. So here we have some werewolves. This is one of the few color pictures I have, actually. Okay, here's another shapeshifter from the upper Midwest. These guys are from 15 to 30 feet tall, supposedly, the Wendigo. They are not Bigfoot. They are shapeshifting humans that have been turned into a Wendigo by another Wendigo. They're very similar to a werewolf form. This guy was charged and put in jail for eating his family during a very harsh winter period in Minnesota. The Wendigo tradition probably stems from cannibalistic practices when there was no food in the far north. This guy was a Wendigo hunter and went out and killed several Wendigos and was charged and put in jail for murder because the Wendigo would turn from its hairy big form back to the human form. They would find the dead human. He would be charged. He said, that's fine. That's my job. I'm here to hunt Wendigos. Vampire is another shape-shifting form. Blood is the most powerful of all magical elixirs, and vampires are a rare blood-based phenomenon. Most of your paranormal phenomena do not feature blood. Vampires are an ancient worldwide legend. They are found in every culture, not only in Transylvania or in Hollywood or in Wall Street. There are vampires everywhere. They've been co-opted by pop culture. Good old Bela Lugosi, I want to suck your blood. This is one of the original vampire forms in terms of creating the Dracula myth in Hollywood. This is Vlad the Impaler. At one point, he had 30,000 people on stakes outside of his castle, and he'd sit there amongst these stake people and have lunch, a good bottle of Merlot. Here's some other interesting sort of quasi-vampire, quasi-werewolf type trickster forms that are kind of a blend between the two. The Strogai and the Striges from the Greek myths, and the Strogai from the Romanian and Slavic myths. These are kind of stylized versions. One of the other paranormal phenomenon that I unfortunately became very personally involved with is the cattle mutilation phenomenon. I don't have time to go into this. I've done quite a bit of research and work in this area. I believe at its core, there is a trickster involved that's bloodthirsty, that is conducting select cattle mutilation cases at the beginning of mutilation waves, and it is a trickster form, and this is a blood-based phenomenon. I was introduced to the trickster when I was investigating a case that happened 13 years before, and they described a old-fashioned 1950 style helicopter, yellow in color, that flew out of their field, and they found their bull mutilated. 13 years later, I went and interviewed them when I found out about their case. The next morning, I was typing up my notes, and an antique 1950 yellow helicopter flew over my house. Now, at the time, I thought all these stuff was aliens. And within about 5 seconds, I realized that there was something infinitely more complex going on. And that's when I first kissed the tar baby, I guess. It's still kind of stuck to my face here. This is what really hooked me into thinking and realizing that there was some sort of tricksterish element involved in the paranormal. I don't have time to go too far into it, but it's a careful what you wish for scenario. Cattle are very detrimental to the environment. The reason why mutilations are happening, I think, is we're possibly as a collective manifesting some of these cases, the trickster cases, but some of them, because we know that we're going to have to outlaw cattle as a food source at some point. Largest source of deserts, largest source of freshwater pollution. Single biggest reason why we're cutting down the rainforest to make more grazing room. This is a whole nother lecture that I can do. It's about 4 hours long. Another interesting trickster form is the chupacabra. Everybody's heard of these little guys. Here's a rare photograph of one. Probably most of you have never seen that. But this is, again, another example of a blood-based paranormal phenomenon that is very tricky. How come we've never been able to catch one? Supposedly, maybe they've caught one down in South America. Supposedly, they've caught one in Texas, but it looks like a mangy coyote to me, which is another trickster form, of course. Okay, the ultimate trick. This is the ultimate blood-based phenomenon in terms of the Western world. This is the transmogrification of the blood of Christ and the body of Christ into a magical elixir for ceremonial purposes. Again, I could go off on this, but I don't have time. But rest assured, this guy up here appreciates the control mechanism called the Roman Catholic Church and Christianity, and the three religions started, in the Judeo-Christian tradition: Islam, Judaism, and Christianity. And one of the things that we're seeing right now is a clash of civilizations because none of these three can agree. And I'm going to talk about that a little bit later. This is another form of trickster. David, when he suggested I write a new book, Beyond the Mysterious Valley, he said, "Why don't you write a book about skinwalkers?" And I told him I didn't think I could come up with enough material to write an article for a magazine, let alone a whole book. Skinwalkers are very enigmatic black magicians in the Dene, Navajo, and Apache tradition. They supposedly, allegedly have the ability to shapeshift. That's why they're included in my presentation, because they're shapeshifters. And they are a form of dark shamanism, if you will. One of the things, allegedly, that it takes to become a skinwalker is to kill a member of your own family, ideally a member that's closest to you. And I could go on. I've done quite a bit of research into that whole subject, and it's very scary, and there are real skinwalkers out there. I've talked to law enforcement who have investigated cases. Skinwalkers have been known to be able to run next to cars at 70 miles an hour. Some dark adepts, like skinwalkers, are said to be able to turn into a variety of animal forms, be able to teleport themselves as balls of light between locations when they need an express train and not the local. Moving right along, I don't have time to digress too much on these things. Each one of these things could be a whole lecture. I have been involved for the last 5.5 years in haunted site investigations. Now, the poltergeist is a classic trickster form. How many here know what a poltergeist is? Really? Okay, well, poltergeist generally is a very mischievous force that's found generally around a troubled adolescent. I have been to some of the most haunted sites in America, including the Sallie House, where we got this photograph of an entity going up the stairs, or some force going up the stairs. This hallway, we heard the distinct voice, pardon my English, saying "fuck you" to the whole group that was assembled there. Of course, we were trying to do a TV show, and all the recordings that we got had curse words in them, so how are you going to put that on TV when you have to bleep out your evidence? Classic tricksterism. Okay, I think you're getting my point here. This is me carrying a camera at the Manteno State Hospital in Illinois, the creepiest place second creepiest place I've ever been in. I do not wish to return. I did not believe in ghosts. I thought it was a bunch of, wishful thinking until I became a cameraman with a crack ghost hunting team, and there's definitely something lurking around some of these buildings that we went into, no question about it. The Devils and Genies. How many people watched I Dream of Jeannie? Classic trickster form, right? The jinn, as they're called singularly, or the jinni, are an Islamic form. Right after my book was published, somebody in, I forget where it was, Qatar or the United Arab Emirates or Saudi Arabia, one of those Middle Eastern countries, they took a genie to court, into religious court, and charged it, sued it for harassment. This is a real news story. It's not a joke. It wasn't April Fool's Day. This was a real event. There are dozens and dozens and dozens of genie. They have lifespans. They have kids, societies. There's a whole hierarchy. There's 12 different types of categories. Each category has subcategories. When I started doing my research, I was astounded. And when you talk to some of the imams and some of the Islamic scholars about this clash of civilizations right now, a lot of them will say, well, it's the jinn. They're the ones that are creating all this problem between us. If we could just solve that problem, then it'd be Rodney King. We could all get along. So the jinn are an area I would suggest researching. Now, I did talk about the monotheistic system of religion in the West, marginalizing the trickster and creating the demon or devil forms. Demons and devils originally, as Mark pointed out, serpent forms in that particular guise, are not considered evil. They're not considered bad. But you got to have a bad guy, and let's blame it on the trickster. Here we go. Here's some, I love these different types of jinn. This looks like a kangaroo man, this elephant man. This guy's kind of weird. This is actually a real etching from Persia. And of course, the genie in the bottle, careful what you wish for. I give you 3 wishes, make sure you know what they are. Okay, now we'll go on to elementals. We're just cruising through the material here. One of my favorite books is called The Fairy Faith in Celtic Countries, written by W.Y. Evans Wentz. He's the guy here. Amazing book. He, back in the late 19th and early 20th century, collected hundreds of stories from the Celtic countries of elementals, gnomes, fairies, dwarves, all the types of trolls and goblins and kelpies, and the list, the Sith, the list of Celtic elemental forms is endless. I couldn't believe how many different types there are. And you go over to the next county and they have their own slightly different version. You go to the next country, they have a different name, but it's the same basic thing. Trolls live under bridges. You're never supposed to eat any food if you get taken to fairyland, because then you'll stay there, similar to Rip Van Winkle, where he drank the beer and fell asleep under the tree and woke up 20 years later. When you start looking at all these legends and stories and myths from different countries and different cultures, they all have very similar themes. And if you start correlating these things together, you come up with very interesting thinking, at least I do. Another favorite book of mine is Passport to Magonia. Magonia is the place that you go when the fairies take you somewhere. This is Jacques Vallée, the eminent ufologist, astrophysicist, computer expert. He took Evans Wendt's work one step further. He said, well, if these Celtic forms are shapeshifters and they can fly and do all this stuff, maybe they are a precursor to the UFO phenomenon, and he equated Celtic fairies and gnomes and dwarves and sightings of these beings to sightings of aliens and UFOs. Very, very scholarly work, very well done. Here are some very famous images. Of course, Sir Arthur Conan Doyle supported the two cousins who came up with the Cottingley photos. These are obviously cutouts, although this photo, they swear to their graves, was real. You see the fairy forms here. It's a little tough to see in this light. This is spinning a fairy bath. The girls didn't know about this, supposedly. It was only investigators of fairies knew about the sun bath that they could spin. And when they saw this, they were very impressed because there was no way these little girls could have known this. The precursor to the abduction would be the changeling. The fairies would come and substitute like a wooden effigy baby or a sickly baby for a healthy baby. This is gnomes and fairies, gnome dwarf forms. Most of the chapter in my book on elementals is on North American elementals. There are hundreds of elemental forms in North America. Did you know that? Right now, one of the most prevalent things that they see up at the Dulce Indian Reservation are 2-foot-high hairy dwarves. Everybody sees them. They got them supposedly on surveillance tapes from the casino parking lot cameras. These forms are found all up and down the Rocky Mountains. They're found all over the West. Generally, the story goes that when the Indians originally move into an area, they displace little people. And this is from Florida to Maine, and from the East Coast to the West Coast, up to Alaska. One of the most prevalent sightings down in South America of alien types are 2-foot hairy dwarves, dark, swarthy, hairy dwarves. Instead of like these, Americanized Whitley Strieber grays with the big eye, almond eyes and stuff. They see dwarves down there. And we'll get into that whole thing a little bit later. This is a very interesting 14-foot-high, fully grown skeleton mummy that was found in, I think in Idaho, or was it Wyoming? Wyoming. And it's called the Pedro Mountain Mummy, I think, if I remember. They did x-rays on this thing, and they determined that this was a fully grown being that's sitting down. It's 14 inches high, and it was found inside this ancient cavern. Again, it's one of many forbidden archaeological finds and discoveries, which I'm going to get to in a minute. Of course, these are more stylized versions of dwarf forms. Okay, how am I doing? Am I leaving everybody behind here? You guys following me? Okay, is it making sense, or am I totally off my rocker? You're laughing. That's not a good sign. Okay. All right, hoaxes as tricksters. Okay, we all those other forms that we were talking about tend to be more symbiotic. They help humanity. They tend to work alongside us. Now we're going to talk about more human tricksters that have used trickster methodology and trickster tools to bamboozle, steal, parasitically subjugate other humans. I forgot. I should have read that. Forbidden Archaeology is a very good book. I highly recommend it. It is filled with discoveries that absolutely do not make sense, like finding spark plugs inside geodes, perfectly carved figurines from a mile down in a coal mine, footprints in stone that seem to be following dinosaur footprints, discoveries of artifacts in North America that aren't supposed to be here because the Phoenicians were never here, right? The Romans, no, Egyptians, the Buddhists, all these particular cultures never were supposedly were going to visit North America prior to Columbus. The Chinese were here, probably. Obviously the Celts were here, the Vikings. So this book, and I do recommend it highly, is very, very good. It's filled with hundreds and hundreds of these types of inexplicable discoveries. Now, why do I include them here as tricksterism? It's because it's almost like reality is trying to shake us out of our static view of migrations of people around the world. And this is a classic example of tricksterism. So if you find in 1909 a cavern filled with Egyptian and Buddhist artifacts in the Little Colorado River Gorge by the Grand Canyon, the Smithsonian supposedly cleaned out 109 truckloads and then dumped it all into the Atlantic some years later, so that they wouldn't have to admit that there were evidence of ancient cultures here in North America. Go figure. They don't like their static system, their academic structure to be called into question. So here's some inadvertent hoaxes. This is a very interesting one. How many here know about Orson Welles' 1938 War of the Worlds broadcast? My mother told me about this. She said everybody in their neighborhood freaked out. The Martians have landed in New Jersey, and we're all going to die. And people were committing suicide. You know, there was accidents, fires, all kinds of weird things happened, and all because Orson Welles did a fake broadcast that took H.G. Wells' story, transplanted it to New Jersey, and they did a theater radio play, and everybody thought it was real. If you didn't hear the first disclaimer, for the first 45 minutes after that, then there was no disclaimer, and it sounded like a real news broadcast. Well, Wells kind of knew what he was doing, but he had no idea the impact it would have. Here's some other hoaxes. P.T. Barnum, what's his famous phrase that's associated with him? There's a sucker born every minute. No, there's a trickster who's going to make a sucker every minute. This is one of the things. A Cardiff giant was found in upstate New York. A lot of weird tricksterous things come from upstate New York for some reason. You have the rise of the Fox sisters and spiritualism, Joseph Smith and Moroni starting the Mormon religion, and the Cardiff giant. Well, this big giant was manufactured, patinaed and carved, and then they buried it and left it for a year, and then these guys were digging a well. The guy that had them dig the well knew exactly where to tell them to dig, and they dug and they found this giant. So it became this huge, spectacular find of a giant in upstate New York. And then it was, academics looked at it and said, well, this is obviously a hoax. It's not a real giant mummy. And even after debunking it, thousands of people would line up to see old hoaxy. So even the power of a hoax can even carry on after people know it's a hoax. Okay, here's Joseph Smith, a nice glowing figure. Doug and Dave supposedly were the first ones to create the modern crop circles. After having a few pints in the English pub, they go out with boards and rope, and they batten down the old crops and create crop circles. Well, that's not to say all crop circles are hoaxes. Most of them are. But look at the belief system that has sprung up around crop circles. I have a theory that even though probably the most elaborate ones, the really beautiful ones that are so complex, they're probably hoaxed. And they're done by teams of people that really they work and prepare for months to do these things. But what if they're being compelled by some tricksterish energy to do the particular design they're doing? And all these designs are trying to talk to us, even though each one individually doesn't make sense, even to the people that make them. Collectively, maybe they're trying to tell us something. So there seems to be a collective thing going on here. How am I doing on time there? Okay. Again, these are a seance. The Ouija board was invented during the spiritualist movement. Aleister Crowley, here's your first image of a big-headed alien gray. Notice the eyes should be here, but Crowley didn't want to freak everybody out, so he gave it regular eyes, but you can see the almond eye shapes here, which was in the original drawing. This drawing was done in 1919 after he summoned a lamb with the Alamantra working, which is a very rigorous ritual that was done on Long Island, and he walked hand in hand with Lamb, who was a little guy, only about 3.5, 4 feet tall. And this is our first picture of what has become a very strong, powerful meme, a super meme in culture. Everybody know what a meme is? Hands that don't know what a meme is? A meme is to culture what a gene is to biology. In other words, Homer Simpson going, "Don't!" has become a meme. Everybody knows what that is, okay? A super meme is a collection of memes that come together that create even a larger, more powerful meme. A UFO would be a super meme. And the individual memes that make up that super meme would be the UFO, the alien form, the flying saucer, the abduction phenomenon, crop circles, cattle mutilations, they've all been sort of tied into the UFO phenomenon. So these constituent memes make up a super meme. Well, this is the start of the alien meme in 1919. Okay, Roswell. Oh boy, I could go on this one, boy. Roswell was a tricksterish event. And I think most people that are interested in this case should research what Wernher von Braun, the head of NASA and the head of DISC, the Defense Industrial Security Agency, what he was doing down at White Sands in 1947. I find it very interesting that out of 300 witnesses and over a dozen books, only 5 people have ever actually said anything that could be construed as being otherworldly or alien. Now look at the power and look at the impact that the whole Roswell event has had on culture. So this is a classic example of tricksterism. This is gets my vote as the #1 tricksterish event in our lifetime. This is 9/11. I don't know how many of you out there have done your research on this event, but what they are telling you happened is patently untrue. There is no way that that could have been pulled off without the help and assistance, and coordination and financing of a major country's intelligence agency. Now, most Americans don't know about World Trade Center number 7, which was never hit by a plane, only had a fire on 2 floors and a steel building, in the words of the owner, just before it happened, was pulled. It fell into its footprint at free fall speed in 6 seconds, almost a 50-story building. You cannot do that unless you spend weeks preparing it for demolition. Moving right along. Here's another trickster. Change we can believe in. Look at the people around this guy. It's the same cast of characters that have been shuffling in and out of these positions for the last 20 years. Okay? This country is being set up by trickster. Now, trickster is a force. This is one thing I should have emphasized a little bit more strongly at the beginning of my talk here. The trickster is a force that then becomes personified by the culture. We are getting ready to create a trickster force that is going to topple this corporate fascist state that we live in. And I know these are strong words, and some of you probably aren't very happy hearing them. But let me say it again. You live in a corporatocracy that is a fascist state. Now, this is perfect ground for the trickster. Trickster don't like fascism. Trickster don't like structures. Doesn't like, these entrenched monolithic structures. So mark my words, and I would be willing to place bets on this, that we are going to see a tricksterish event that is going to topple this house of cards. What did Jefferson say? If you don't like your system, in 200 years, if you don't like it, have a revolution, tear it down, and start over again. Well, we have an 8,000-pound gorilla sitting in each and every one of our rooms, our living rooms, and it's drumming its toes on the coffee table. And I hate to be the one to be the bearer of bad news, but this guy is starting to get a little bit antsy. And you don't want to get an 8,000-pound King Kong gorilla antsy, okay? There's some heavy stuff coming down. I hate to be the one to tell you. Another tricksterish form. This is a Nazi saucer from the 1930s and 40s. I'm just suggesting some of the ways that the power structure is going to try to freak you out and have you abdicate complete control over to them. A nice cast of characters, right? How many people have heard of Bohemian Grove and Stone Owl Magic that they do every year? Where was George W. Bush the night before he was nominated, or before he accepted the nomination for his party to be president, or to have the Supreme Court steal the election for him? I mean, let's get real. He was in Bohemian Grove doing ritual magic. Okay? Not only do we have a corporatocracy that are fascist, they're also occultists. And they do ritual magic. And Mark's presentation was the tip of the iceberg about what these guys have been doing since the time of the Templars, since the time of your first Hermeticists and alchemists. These guys have it all figured out, and they think they're slick, but there's one thing that's slicker than they are, and that is the trickster. I love my Cheney with Harmonious Bosch and the Garden of Earthly Delights behind him. There's a little collage I did. And I wanted to stick a fly on W's nose there, but that would have been a little disingenuous. So, here's our trickster form. It's going to ride roughshod over these guys. It is appointed for all men once to die. Therefore, think upon eternity. And as I am to muffed you be, therefore prepare to follow me. We have a little tricksterish event right around the corner. How many people have heard of the Mayan calendar that it's going to end in 2012? When does our calendar end? The Mayan calendar doesn't end. There's 22 Mayan calendars and none of them end. Hello? 3 of them click over like an odometer, go into a whole new cycle, but they don't end. The Maya have predictions going into the year 5000. Where is this coming from? Who said the Mayan calendar is going to end? Why does everybody believe this? What's up with that? Okay. You got about 2 or 3 years to do your research on tricksterism, because when it comes down, you're going to be able to look around and say, I remember that guy said, do my research and figure it out for myself, because I'm telling you, in about 2 or 3 years, you're going to remember this talk and you're going to go, that guy was right. There is an 8,000-pound gorilla, and he's symbiotic. He's not parasitic. He's not Bernie Madoff trying to rip us off, or W and Cheney trying to, help some guy collect $2 billion of terrorist insurance on a complex that had to be taken down anyway because of asbestos, and it would have cost more to take it down than it would to build it. So be very careful of your sources. Be very careful of who you believe. Don't believe me. Do your own research. It's a long, long road through civilization. And we're at the end of a particular major phase of civilization. So be ready. Be prepared. Be at peace. Thank you. Now, I do have a couple of minutes for some questions. So I know there were some questions back here. I couldn't have solved all your, answered all your questions.
I couldn't understand exactly because you talked really fast. Where did George Bush and Dick Cheney go? Where exactly did they go before the election?
Where did they go? Bohemian Grove, which is a state park in California where all the conservative mucky-mucks have been meeting for 130-something years. Yeah, yeah. And they dress up in togas and they go and see who can pee the farthest in the woods. It's
Isn't that above San Francisco?
Yes, yes.
Okay, I know exactly.
Yeah. That's where W was the night before he accepted nomination for his party. Yeah. If you do your fact checking, you'll find that's correct. Yes.
So I want to just tease your imagination a little bit, because I imagine you've thought this all the way through. And so if the mass cultural meme is, okay, we're going to have a huge cataclysmic event, some type of apocalypse or whatever, in the negative sense, in 2012, you have people fearful. You also have people who think it's going to be a good thing.
Exactly.
Transition over. But meanwhile, they're filling in the blanks with things like UFOs are going to take over. And these are things that just kind of come up, but they're put into our media, into our mainstream consciousness as a way of setting it up.
Mm-hmm. So what is your question?
So the trickster thing, then, you think is going to even topple these shapeshifters who are trying to manipulate the, scene. Yeah. So what is that going to look like?
Well, again, I'm not a prophet. I stay away from 2 words, belief and prophecy. in terms of my own personal. Yeah. Okay, I can hypothesize. Now, let me restate for the camera. Since we do have dueling theories of what's going to happen in 2012, one theory is it's going to be the end of the fourth world. The world is going to turn over 4 times. It's going to shake us off like fleas off a dog, and we're all going to die. The other view is it's going to be a transformational event that is going to transform not only our thinking about ourselves and our culture, but our actual, in one theory, our actual view of time itself, that time will all of a sudden take on a whole new meaning, and it'll be transformed. Possibly that's when time travel will be invented, so that we'll have all these time traveling events that can only go back to the time when time travel started. So in other words, you can't travel all the way back in the past, only as far back as when time travel was invented. That's one theory. What's going to happen? What do I think? I think it's going to be whatever you are in fear of, or whatever you most hold in the highest light. If you think that your world is going to be toppled and that you're going to die and everything's going to be destroyed, you're probably going to go through that. If you think that you are going to be transformed and go off onto some new plane of awareness or existence, there's a good likelihood that that might happen. So some of us may be transiting and transmuting and transforming, and some of us may be fertilizer. I think a lot of people are going to be dying on this planet very soon. That's my thinking. And unfortunately, it depends on whose theory you believe, but the powers that be really would rather there be about a billion people on this planet, not close to 7.5 or whatever. Any other questions? Yes?
What correlation, if any, is there between super meme, trickster, and morphic field?
Okay, the question is, what correlation is there between a super meme, morphogenic fields, which is Rupert Sheldrake's idea of, and what was the other thing? And the trickster. For one thing, the morphogenic field is the ability for, let's say, a monkey to learn how to wash sand off of a potato. This is an experiment done in Japan. And that one monkey, realizing that it could wash the potato and take the sand off, all of a sudden all the monkeys on the island figured out how to do that, almost simultaneously. So this is part of a morphogenic field. It's also part of the theory of non-locality. If you do something to a particle here in this experiment, all like particles seem to be affected by it. The tie-in between that and a super meme is that hopefully when we get to a point, a tipping point, that there will be the 100th monkey that will figure out, maybe I'm the 100th monkey. Maybe you are, I don't know. But as soon as somebody does that, then it can be a tricksterish event, and that change can echo all the way through the morphogenic field, depending on what that change entails. So the tie-in between the trickster, the morphogenic field, and a super meme is that they're all tied in together, and the trickster may be the thing that triggers the super meme to then trigger the morphogenic field. Make sense? I do recommend Rupert Sheldrake's work, by the way, yes.
When you say that the trickster is going to shortly topple our fascist corporatocracy, are you saying?
I hope so.
Oh, me too. Now, are you saying that this trickster is coming from our collective unconscious?
Yes.
That our collective unconscious is what's going to rebel
Yes.
and overthrow it?
Yes.
Okay.
The question is, when I say that I think that we are going to see a toppling of the corporatocracy and the fascist state as it exists now, is this going to be the collective unconscious manifesting the trickster? My answer is a resounding yes. The trickster is a force that is found within the collective of all of us. We manifest and put a face on the trickster depending on what culture we live in. Right now, everybody's not happy with what's going on in the world right now. There's very few people. This is the largest dichotomy between wealth and poverty ever seen on this planet. There are fewer people worth more money and more people worth no money than at any other time in terms of ratio. It's the split between the haves and the have-nots has never been this great. It can't continue, and it won't. And we're going to see the trickster manifesting in various guises, and I think it is going to be a collective manifestation.
Who are all these tricksters pulling this stuff off?
I just said, they're manifestations of us.
Well, manifestation to 9/11?
Well, it's, that's human tricksters at work on that one.
But who are they?
Well, it's the guy that was in charge of 5 Air Force exercises on 9/11, including 2 that featured airliners crashing into buildings in New York and Washington, D.C. Dick Cheney.
Cheney's a trickster.
Cheney is a human trickster that is a parasitic trickster. Cheney to me is like Bernie Madoff. He's pulling a fast one on everybody and getting away with it. Okay? Hate to be the one to be the bearer of bad news, but I've got a 50 megabyte file on this event. It really, it rocked my world for 2 years, and I researched and have been researching ever since then. It's amazing what has come out, and it's not conspiracy theory, it's fact. Yes?
A lot of people say that Cheney was actually the power behind the throne of George Bush. He was actually a very stupid man. Well, people agree with that. But that when he was elected, Cheney took over, and actually that Cheney was running things.
Does anyone know who was in the White House the morning of 9/11?
Cheney?
No? Cheney was in an underground bunker like a mole.
Oh,
Like a,
who was? Nobody.
George Herbert Walker Bush was in the White House.
He was?
Yeah.
So the old man was there?
The old man was in the White House.
Okay.
How many people knew that?
Everyone loves a mystery. One of the greatest mysteries of the past is the enigma of the great megalith builders. How were they able to build these giant structures? Why do similar megalithic structures appear all over the world? Did the ancients build these structures with primitive tools, or did they use some sort of highly developed technology similar to our own? Modern-day explorer and researcher David Hatcher Childress is founder of the World Explorers Club, a group dedicated to uncovering the mysteries of past civilizations. David has been fascinated by the enigma of the megalith builders and the methods they may have used, whether ingeniously simple or highly complicated.
I expect to find in Peru the answers to some of the many enigmas of the megalithic engineering that's found in the Andes Mountains.
What has really struck me about the sites in Peru, at Tiahuanaco, Machu Picchu, is the enormous stonework that the ancients actually created. I've been fascinated with it. I'm absolutely enamored with Machu Picchu.
On previous trips to Peru, I have seen what are amazing enigmas with giant megalithic blocks, perfectly cut and articulated what seems to be high-tech engineering far beyond what the ancient Incas were capable of doing.
In order to search out the answers to the enigma of the megalith builders around the world, David has decided to enlist the help of British engineer Christopher Dunn, a specialist in modern machining techniques.
The conventional theory of how the ancients cut stone and created these artifacts is the use of copper chisels or copper implements to use sand, bone, or wood, or actually use another stone and bash the rock. These methods just do not fit the evidence and cannot create those artifacts the way they were created. It's impossible to do that.
My first impression was, with very little historical background, that all this was done by hand. It was lapping and chiseling and took many hours, days, weeks. But after looking at some of the granite that I've seen, I question if it was even feasible to do by hand. And it kind of leads me into directions of thinking about the application of machine tools some time ago. There's multiple aspects involved here. Step one is, how do you cut this stuff thousands of years ago? How and with what? And then once you get it cut, for whatever reason, they've got precise corner breaks and fillet radiuses down lengths that are unexplained, but they obviously had something to inspect these characteristics, to assure things were parallel, to assure they were perpendicular. And that goes out into another branch that, just gets people thinking.
With the help of Christopher Dunn, David is determined to fly to Peru and take Chris to some of the megalithic sites in the Andes that he is familiar with to see what evidence of ancient high technology that they might be able to find. Along the way, we may learn some interesting historical facts concerning the mysteries of South American culture. All aboard for Peru! In the central Andes of Peru, David and Chris arrive in the ancient city of Cusco. It was used as the capital of the Inca Empire, which began around 900 AD and lasted until the Spanish conquest in 1531. But is Cusco really a city that predates the Incas by thousands of years?
As we go around and we see places, we'll be advancing the theory that Incas didn't build these walls and that they were already here in Inca times. Incas lived in these buildings, but they didn't build them. They were already standing here. This is the most famous stone in Cusco. It's the stone of the 12 angles. It's the stone that appears on the Cusco beer. And to a lot of people, this is like the symbol of Cusco, this stone particularly.
On a hill above Cusco can be found the massive walls of Sacsayhuaman, an edifice of imposing walls built with gigantic blocks of limestone that are perfectly fitted together. It is one of the most imposing sights in all of South America.
And one of the questions that you have to ask is why would anybody go to such extreme effort to build with such giant stones? It's not necessary. I mean, they could be building with much smaller stones, but here they're building with giant stones, and it's...
Well, they didn't have to put in as much effort as we would, that's why.
I think that's it. Yeah, and so the reason why they are building with such giant stones is because it was easy for them, not because it was hard.
Yeah.
This is a particularly unique rock here, and many people think that it has to do with the Kundalini serpent energy that's taught in ancient India, and that this whole figure here is of a snake, and we see pictures of snakes carved in the stones in Cuzco. This one is particularly unusual because it's very deep and large, carved into this granite, and then you have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 chakras. It's thought that this corresponds to the Kundalini energy in your spine going up through your chakras here. What we find right here at the seat of the Inca, here it's Sacsayhuaman, is that this seat right here is magnetized. And by bringing our compass along this stones right here, the compass is spinning. So there's a curious magnetic anomaly right here, some strong magnetic field that's either naturally in the rock or has somehow been artificially placed here. It's possible that this magnetic field actually has something to do with the moving of these giant stones.
We're looking at a processes or machine tools or tool bits anyway that's common to the builders of this facility, for want of a better word, the builders of this site, and what they were doing in Egypt.
If this was actually carved by a glacier that was smoothing it out, you have to wonder why you're going to have these rough parts here. If there had been a glacier actually carving this, it would have smoothed out this entire stone, and you wouldn't have these rough knobs.